Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to 168 our episodes here on now going on 4 years, I guess, Jason, of our industry insights. So this week, Jason, what we wanted to do is take our superset of data, the industry's largest and quite maybe the longest running. I'm a little iffy on that, but we'll say it's true. The largest and longest running data protection research in this space, not a Veeam research vehicle, meaning only Veeam customers. It is an industry-wide view of what's going on globally in the state of data protection today. But Jason, we want to take a different lens on it for today, don't we?
Yeah, so and I do think it's actually the longest running report of its kind in the space because Veeam has been doing it this way for at least 5 years. You and I have each put fingerprints on reports for Veeam doing this even before we joined Veeam in the office of CTO. So it's been nearly a decade of folks asking for this data. So this is the Data Protection Trends Report. So every year, third-party research firms, not Veeam, third-party research firms go out and ask blind organizations, the IT leader responsible for data protection for their organizations, and ask, what are you going to do for the next year? Right. And so and some years we ask only enterprises. Last year we asked enterprises and SMB and commercial. And so what we wanted to do last year was kind of compare some of the differences between SMB and commercial. And what we found is that in some cases, the rationale might be different, but the outcome and strategy of what they're intending to actually do is the same. So classic case here, when you talk about disaster recovery, enterprises have multiple data centers, and yet they want to go to the cloud. SMBs don't have multiple data centers, so they're going to the cloud. Either way, the percentage of organizations going to the cloud is actually about the same. It's just their rationale for why is different. So we thought it'd be fun to look at last year's SMB specific survey data and then compare that with the same questions on the global survey that was done for 2024. I'm looking forward to sharing data with the folks at home.
And speaking of all the people, want to give a shout out. You may have seen go by in the bottom third here. Give us a little comment about where you may be tuning in from. We're actually quadcasting on 4 different platforms. Whoops, get it over there in frame. 4 different platforms. Let us know where you might be tuning in from. And as always, if you have a question or comment, throw that in there too. We've got a social media team that's going to be helping us go through where you are tuning in from and if you have anything to say. So without further ado, Jason, let's dive in.
So the first question, one of the ones what I always think is most interesting is how likely are you to change solutions, right? So, we've talked for years, it's always been a myth that folks never change backup solutions. It wasn't true then. It's certainly not true now. Let's go ahead and bring up the first data. So the data chart that you're looking at here on the right-hand side is the 2024 data. And so globally, 54% of organizations intend to change backup solutions. By the way, everything we're going to cover and more is all covered in a blog post that just went live on Veeam.com earlier today. You can hit the blog post, and then from there, hopefully there's a link to click to the actual brief of all the SMB specific insights from that QR code in the upper right-hand corner. But for now, 54% of organizations intend to change backup solutions in 2024, which I think is interesting, in that when you look at the SMB data from last year, 55%, so only 1 point off, of SMBs intended to change last year to get ready for this year. So there's still just a lot of core sentiment around that interest in change. Now, there's 2 things that you want to know about change, Dave. 1, do you wanna? And 2, can you afford to? Right? So let's talk about that. Do you wanna? Yes, over half. SMBs, over half. Enterprises overall, that's a very consistent sentiment. Last year, 83% of SMBs said they were increasing their budget in data protection. This year overall, we see 92%. And I can think of a couple scary things out there that's driving that change. But Dave, SMBs look like everyone else. They want to change, and they're going to put some money into it.
Yeah, now having done multiple different research efforts, not only over multiple years, but different research tools, some cloud focused, some disaster recovery focused, and certainly industry-wide focused like this tool, what we're seeing over and over again, though, is that the SMB or mid-sized enterprise segment is not radically different than larger enterprise, which is a bit of a myth bust because it's been common to say in the past that the needs are very, very different. Now, Jason described perfectly that you may come to the same conclusion on the answer, such as go to cloud or maybe switch backup solutions, but you may get there for different reasons. But one of the first data points here, Jason, that you alluded to, this looks a lot like enterprise. The other thing I think is very interesting, this is essentially a sentiment response. This is something is indicating a need or desire to want to make a shift. Doesn't mean that 54% are going to change, just like you mentioned that last year there was a slightly different number, but a high number that was close to this. And obviously all of them didn't make that change. So there is a level of frustration that we want to unpack. I would point out, too, if you take the undecided, let's say some even small portion of them do decide to shift, we're really approaching 3 out of 5 organizations potentially that think that if they can, to your point about budgets, but also perhaps will they be allowed to, from upper management, make a change. But it's nonetheless a reaction that all is not currently well. And then I think overall, the budget piece is huge because we're used to hearing, well, you can't afford to go make a shift. And yet we're seeing now multiple different data points over multiple years saying that people are investing in changing their resiliency, their availability.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple different pressures that's kind of driving for some of that. But I think one that, and again, let's put this back in the context of SMB versus enterprise, right? So while the technologies may differ, certainly the scale differs, right? It would be easy to assume that, well, SMBs, I mean, they're smaller, they can just get by. Here's the way I look at it. If an enterprise has a major catastrophe, right? Fire, flood, ransomware, whatever. Somewhere walking around the halls of that enterprise is Clark Kent, right? And so on their worst possible day, when everything else has gone bad, Clark's going to jump into a janitor's closet, come out as Superman, and try to start saving that enterprise. SMBs don't have Clark Kent. They're lucky if they have Jimmy Olsen. Right? They don't have somebody who's going to put on a cape and actually help them solve, but SMBs are just as dependent on their data as an enterprise is. But the difference is not only now are they down, now they got to call a reseller or a cloud provider or somebody else. They're going to pay more money while they're hemorrhaging cash because they're just as dependent on their data. So I think it's important that when you look, that you don't underestimate how much SMB depends on their IT infrastructure, and they're just as precarious, if not more, when catastrophe strikes. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And, if I were to mend any possible other explanation, it could be they've got Superman, but Superman's being asked to do what the entire Justice League is. Meaning, they've got an incredibly capable individual who is doing 10 different tasks simultaneously. So it's not always a matter of skill. It's a matter of being overworked or just basically having a number of different types of solutions that are barely stitched together. And that may be, Jason, why we find ourselves year over year now with over half saying they intend to switch, because the problem or the answer to that issue keeps getting pushed down the road.
We're going to have to keep those analogies going, because when we do the ransomware data in a couple months, we're really going to double back on the Justice League, because sometimes you need a Man of Steel and sometimes you need a Dark Knight. And so we can talk about CISOs and Sec Pros and backup admins, and Green Lantern will fare heavily in that discussion, but that'll be coming in June. In the meantime, though, let's take a look at the map. Let's see how we're doing on, are anyone coming in from Gotham, Metropolis? Take us away, Dave.
Yeah, so let's see. In the United States, we've got Colorado, Texas, Georgia, and Ohio. Want to give a shout out. Be sure to do put a comment in where you may be tuning in from. Now, Jason, we get probably 4 to 5 times more audience in a 1 week period that watches this on our YouTube channel, where we go and persist these. But if you're watching us live, do give a comment about where you might be tuning in from, or if you've got anything to add to the conversation. Always love to weave those in as well. So, okay, so far, SMB, not radically different than enterprise. frustration or concern about what's currently going on and wanting to change. Budget's looking favorable. Let's go. How do we go from there?
So from there, let's start talking about, okay, so we have an intent to change. Let's look at what they're going to change to. So one of the next questions that we ask each year, you can't have conversations in 2024 without talking about where does cloud-based services fit within a strategy. Now, the chart you're looking at, 88% of organizations globally in 24 intend to utilize backup as a service or disaster recovery as a service for at least some of their servers over the next 2 years. So I went back to the 23 data on what they were looking for, and by 2025, so the midpoint on that 2-year curve, only 75% of SMBs anticipate using BAS and DRAS by 2025. Now, Dave, two things about that. I say only with a bunch of sarcasm, italics, and an asterisk on it. Only 3 out of 4 organizations are planning on using backup as a service, right? The other thing, though, that doesn't show in this data, because I thought, why is it that everywhere else it always matches? Why is it that it doesn't match here? So I looked at in the data after the slides were built. It's actually because as of last year's data, a higher percentage of SMBs were already using BAS or DRAS, whereas in this case, enterprises are kind of catching up, which I think is an amazing tweak on this slide. They're just looking for outcomes. Dave, what are your thoughts, my friend?
I really like what you just commented on there, and I have to give credit. It's actually back when I worked at Gartner, there was a different analyst there in the mid-sized enterprise segment, or SMB. Gartner just calls it mid-sized enterprise. He's now since retired, but he loved to always say one of the great things about SMB or mid-sized enterprise, unlike larger enterprise, think of them more like a speedboat, maybe being a little more nimble, able to pivot a little faster. So to your point about, well, the mid-sized organizations were already embracing cloud earlier ahead of aspiration or even full deployment of large enterprise. That's a good case in point. So sometimes we talk about, wow, isn't the mid-size more challenged because they don't have as much staff, as much skill per requirement, maybe even money, but we're actually dispelling some of the money aspects right here. But do want to give a shout out, if you're a mid-sized organization in SMB, your kind of superpower, going back to that analogy, is that you've got the ability to go make changes oftentimes more rapidly than larger organizations, or not just with intent, but to fully roll them out into production. So don't look at this as glass half empty. Here's a glass half full case of your ability to respond actually exceeds that of a Fortune 500 company in many cases.
Yeah, I got to admit, if I'm just a fledgling photographer and I know that I did not come from another planet with superpowers, I'd be signing up for as a service too. Because you know what as a service providers have, in addition to cloudy copies of your data, they have superheroes, right? They have people all day long whose job it is to rescue you from your worst things. In fact, my son actually works for a cloud provider, and almost every day he's working with a company who's having real disasters and helping them solve for them. So you actually do have superheroes in those as a service providers. If I was an SMB, I would have gone for it too. So, all right, let's stay on that vein. So we've got BAS and DRAS as likely for some of the servers. That's overall what's being protected. Let's look at where that data is going to, because it's going to tell a lot of that same story. In this case, we're going to look specifically at disaster recovery. Now, Dave, you're going to recognize the charts on the left. Every other year, actually it's every year, but I made it easier just so that we don't have an eye chart. But this is the data from 2020's DPR, 2022's DPR, 2024's DPR, and in 24, what they thought it was going to be in 26. Right, so that's the 4 data on the left, where you're looking at still pretty much a flat line of organizations, about 30-ish%. Are going to use their own self-managed dual data center approach. But you can see that there's an intent to decline, right? 30 expects to go down to 26. Meanwhile, 41 expects to go up to 47. So while the dual data center model, we love the dual data center model, is going to go down just a little bit, look at all the growth in where people are going to do disaster recovery to. They're going to clouds, 23, 36, 41, 47. What's the SMB answer? Take a look on the right-hand side. If they have multiple sites, they're still using them, But look at that growth. Over half of all
Yes.
SMBs anticipate using the cloud as their DR site of choice. I think they got it right, Dave.
Yeah, 100%, because, if we kind of combine a few of these things we've just been describing, why go pay for a facility you're only going to use fractionally part of the time? But that's an infrastructure statement, a real estate statement.
Yep.
Also, though, to your point about skills, in some cases, you can actually import or rent those skills, meaning if you have to fail over, wouldn't it be nice to have people on tap, like a service provider that's used to doing this, understands how to reconfigure the DNS? It's always the DNS. So you can actually get assistance when you need it without having to have it on staff. There's a lot of good reasons to do this. Another case here are proving that larger enterprises starting to see the implementation deployment choice of the SMB.
Yep. So, and again, I just can't emphasize enough. I love that the data for the SMB on that right-hand side matches the overall sentiment for what enterprises are doing, even if the rationale is different. I also love the fact that when you look at SMBs, take a look at the number on top. Overall, 78%, nearly 4 out of 5 small and mid-sized organizations have the capability of recovering elsewhere, right? Fire takes them out just like it does an enterprise. Flood takes them out just like an enterprise. Ransomware takes them out just like an enterprise. I love the fact that 4 out of 5 organizations have a resiliency plan.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out. That's an important point. Here's another case of where there's an advantage to perhaps being a mid-sized business. So you would think, oh, well, it's a Fortune, pick your number, 500 company, a Fortune 10 company. Don't they have everything, perfectly handled? They've got the resources, they've got the staff, etc. But yet, what this data shows is the mid-sized enterprise has more of their workload, or more of them have a better plan, or at least have a plan already in place. I think that's really worth noting. And, speaking of noting, I haven't mentioned it yet, but in the upper right-hand side, you see this QR code here. Always love to remind people, Jason, go download the full report. Like to say you owe it to yourself to get educated. We promise it's not a Veeam commercial. Yep. This is actually industry-wide. It's not at all gated or limited to Veeam customers. In fact, Veeam deployments, Veeam shops make up only a small percentage, like 6 to 7%, given the question at any one point in time. So it is overweighted towards a global view, an industry-wide view. We can break things down a few ways, in this case by size of customer, but use this information as a way to hopefully have better conversations with your business and your partners.
Dave, I just thought, I love your speedboat analogy. I love the agileness of smaller organizations. One of the things I think a lot of folks underappreciate is when you do have a smaller organization, you likely are dealing with less complex production applications, right? So you're not dealing with old HPU Xboxes sitting in the corner. You're not dealing with as many multi-tiered CRM applications, right? Some of your stuff is going to be on SaaS, which is natively durable. You still got to back it up. Those are two different conversations. But your servers are predominantly Windows servers. There's some Linux boxes, but you're dealing with a simpler set of complexity-wise architecture, which again makes it easier to then fail over when you're relocating across site. So I love the fact that we're getting this and being able to compare along the way. So how about we continue? Because I think there's 2 more major topics that we still want to kind of cover all the way through. One of them is, let's talk about change drivers. Dave, you and I, this is one of our favorite slides overall. Let's revisit what SMBs said was the primary reasons why they would change backup solutions for 2023, and then compare that with the data for 2024. In 2023, of the 4,200 organizations that were surveyed, 931 of them were small or mid-sized organizations. And of those, hey, Dave, surprise, surprise, improving reliability was the top chart or top decision maker. Any surprise on that?
No, and if you haven't seen some of our talk track on this specific slide, which is like Jason says, literally probably our favorite in all of the research that we do, this could look a little counterintuitive. So let me give you at least my take on it. Jason, love to hear yours. The reason why improved reliability success of backups are so important is it all starts from that. You have to have a good capture of data first before you can do restoration, before you can do other kinds of aspirational things, maybe even bring back that data for DevOps or analytics purposes. But you've got to go get a copy of that data. And when we say success, what this really means is you've got to go get a copy that completes, but also, Jason, has to meet the backup window. It has to meet the SLA. So if it's possible to get a good backup, it takes 5 days to do it, very likely that job got killed. So it did not complete. It's not reliable. It's not deemed successful. So success is both capturing the data and capturing the data in the required amount of time. So another talk track around why this might be challenging is if you look at the business, any business really, mid-size or enterprise, they've got on-prem activity. They've got SaaS-based activity. They're most assuredly doing things, infrastructure as a service, maybe platform as a service. We're now in a time frame of expanded applications. Some of us are in production with Kubernetes. We're exploring different kinds of databases, meaning non-relational databases. Just making the point that the industry went through a period of time when we were collapsing a bit. Yep. Windows and Linux were the predominant OSs, is one case in point. Now we add in cloud and all of its many variants. We've got an expansion that's taking place, making it more difficult to get successful, reliable backups.
Yeah, and we do have one comment from Mark on why are there 2 lines on the chart. So let me weigh in on that. I apologize. I should have mentioned that earlier in the line. So in some of these questions like this, it's actually 2 questions. Choose all the reasons that you might want to change backup solutions. Those are the long lines to the right. And then you can only choose one. What's the most important reason why you would change? And those are the short lines on there. So Mark, thank you for the call out on that. And that's worth pointing out actually in this case, because while it's stacked by most important, whereas reliability is top of mind, and Dave, you nailed that. I think it's interesting that the most common reason why someone would actually change solutions is to embrace a cloud-based backup solution, which we've been talking a lot about over the last couple slides. So good call out. And by the way, always please feel free to keep the questions going. If you have questions about this stuff that don't get answered today, you can reach out to strategic research, all one word, at veeam.com. David, I'll answer your questions from there too, or just keep them in your LinkedIn or your Facebook or your X, depending on where you're watching from. Okay, so Dave, this was nearly 1,000 small and mid-sized organizations that surveyed on this question last year. Let's look at the global data for this year, and we're seeing a couple things. Now, improving reliability is most common and most important. I'm also going to argue, by the way, if you're an SMB, like everything else we've been talking about in the superhero genre, if you want to improve reliability, maybe hiring a smart kid to do it for you in a cloud-based managed service is a good way to improve your reliability. So I'm going to argue those are conjoined along the way. But Dave, let's talk about for the 2024 data. So most common, most important, improving reliability, that's only getting bigger on those gaps versus all the others. And then take a look, cyber preparedness is showing up in this list a couple times too. What all did you see on this, and how do we map that back to small and mid-sized orgs?
Yeah, I actually like the fact that successful or backups reliability pops a little bit more in this year. Got to go fix that first. It's kind of an upstream, downstream type of a thing. Go fix what's upstream. Now you start looking at, once you do that, once you've solved for that, how can you go tackle your next big problem? Unfortunately, cyber is the next big problem for many of us. So I think that's why that's coming up so high in here as well. Can't help but give a shout out, a tease ahead, a multi-month tease. At the time of Veeam On, early June this year, Jason and I will be unveiling a new ransomware research effort. Mentioned earlier that we do multiple different research activities. Jason, we're going to preview another bit of research for the 3rd year in a row that actually details what happened, what were the experiences, lessons learned from people that actually got hit with ransomware, and hopefully how you can glean from that so that you're not one of them. But as it relates here to this slide, always think it's interesting what pops up here. What I like to looking at is boundary conditions. Moving away from hardware solutions or looking at software hardware cost, not as high as we might have seen in the past, not as high as the more historical SMB talk track would have been, which is it's all about money. It's not all about money. It's about capability.
Yeah. If you were going to a car dealer and you wanted to buy a new car, they said, well, we can save you money. We can get you in this car instead. And it turns out there are less seatbelts than you have family members. Saving money is not the benefit, right? Because you're leaving some kid or mom on the side of the road while you're driving away. That is not a good model. So in this case, economics doesn't fare if you're not getting the outcomes that you need. And the number one outcome overall has to be reliability. It's also worth pointing out that two different cyber considerations. Let me get my mouse back up. So two different cyber considerations show up around in detection and remediation capabilities, as well as hardening or protecting that solution as well. In fact, if you add up the two most importance from those two, it's actually even higher than reliability overall. So certainly as folks are looking at improving their reliability and just overall improving their data protection, for many of them, they're doing that because of the ever looming threat of ransomware. And that is not hyperbole and that is not marketing. Let's talk about that. So our last data point for today, just to kind of wrap up for our time, one of the questions that was asked in the data protection report, again, third year this question's been asked, is how many ransomware attacks did your organization suffer over the last 12 months? We covered this a few months ago, but interestingly enough, in the ransomware trends report that we've done for the last couple of years, SMBs were just as likely, not statistically more, not statistically less, than midsize or enterprises. Ransomware is an equal opportunity offender on this. So in the context of SMB, Dave, only 1 in 4 can hope to not have been hit. 3 out of 4 are going to get hit at least once. And again, no superheroes to save them.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy. If you're playing the odds, it's nice to be optimistic. It's better to be realistic. That's really what we want to convey to everyone. Prepare now ahead of time so that you're not literally going to be one of these statistics. Most of this is just a crime of opportunity. There's state-sponsored events, but a lot of it is any unpatched system, any IP range left unguarded will be attacked. So can't double click on that enough. So Jason, any final words before we start to wrap?
No, I guess the bottom line is, well, hopefully what you heard today, a lot of folks are embracing cloud proactively as well as reactively. Ransomware is an equal opportunity offender. But I do hope that you go download the 2024 Data Protection Trends research. If you Google SMB and data protection trends, you'll get all of these cuts and more specifically for those 900 SMBs that were surveyed in for last year. Please go download the stuff. A wise man once said, you owe it to yourself to get educated.
Yeah, definitely encourage you to go click on that. I want to give a shout out where we'll leave this QR code up there for a little bit. Coming up this Thursday, our great colleague Rick Vanover, he's going to be hosting a session on Tech Bytes, Learn How to Future-Proof Your Business. 1 week from today, Jason, on the 19th, we're going to double click on the 5 key insights to prepare for your worst day. So we've just talked about this is likely to happen. Next week, tune in for a little bit of the antidote, how you can make that hopefully a better day or just a regular day, ideally even. And then lastly, did allude to it, but want to double click on it again. Our annual big conference, VMON 2024 is going to be in June this year in Fort Lauderdale on June 3rd through 5th. We've got a promo code for a 10% discount if you attend in person. It's live, LIVE. Join us in Fort Lauderdale. Jason, I'm told they promise sunshine, so I'm all in.
I guess I'll go too. I like sunshine. Let's do it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Bye for now.